First off, the China Bitcoin mining ban was a series of regulatory actions taken by the Chinese government. That was back in 2021 to halt cryptocurrency, mostly Bitcoin mining activities in the country. And these measures had significant implications for the global Bitcoin mining landscape. If you were here earlier, there was a little bit of discussion about how that changed hash rate distribution around the world. Prior to the ban, China accounted for approximately 65 to 75% of the global Bitcoin hash rate. And then following the crackdown, this share obviously plummeted to near zero for a few months. Today it stands around 14%, I believe. So Roger Huang is a writer, author, speaker who explores the intersection of Bitcoin, China, and global finance. He's best known for his book, Would Mao Hold Bitcoin?, which delves into the historical and political dynamics between China and Bitcoin. Huang's work examines how China's capital controls, state-driven tech policies, and Bitcoin's decentralized nature intersect, offering insights into the broader implications for global monetary systems. And the title of his discussion today here is How China's Ban Made Bitcoin Stronger. So thank you, Roger. Welcome.
All right, thank you, everyone. Woo! We're a little bit of a more intimate crowd, so feel free every time I give this talk, just feel free to heckle, add anything. It would be helpful if my slides were on the thing. I'm not sure, but yes. In the meanwhile, so this is a version of a talk I've given a little bit across the world, and one of the things I found really interesting. The more that we've explored this topic, the more I find that there's more and more threads that just come out of it. Every single time I give this talk or I go to a conference or an event, someone comes up to me and they have just another thread to examine, whether that's a new source or anything else. I've kind of tabulated myself informally, maybe like 100 or 200 different ways that people have used Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies or stable coins in different fashion in China. So all this to say, I guess, let me give myself a little bit of background about myself while we're getting the talks kind of going here. So I started writing about Bitcoin in 2014. If you all remember Dennis Rodman going to North Korea, they were sponsored by a company called Potcoin. Unfortunately, that was actually the first article I ever wrote, was about this company called Potcoin. And they shot into becoming a zombie ICO way back in the day. I started writing about Bitcoin. I wasn't too sure why I was fascinated by it, but I just was. Could we maybe not get my expense reports up on the slides? Okay. Can I? Okay, all right. Good thing I got it. Good thing I wasn't sending the top secret, the top secret documents up here. Okay, are we good here? Yeah. All right. I think I need to just maximize this, and then we're on and off. So, anyways, just to end that, born in China, raised in Canada, got a great community out here in Vancouver. Will's out here in front. Let's go. So, how did Bitcoin get stronger after China's bans? Seems like a very counterintuitive concept, no? Like someone's trying to ban you, someone's trying to get you to stop doing something, but despite that, Bitcoin keeps on ticking. Well, I want to start a little bit with, for those of you who aren't as familiar with kind of like how the Chinese surveillance state works, like just a little bit of a broad overview, just so we get an understanding of kind of what Bitcoin was placed against. So the first thing to know, I kind of have this like image here. China is the country with the most CCTV cameras in the world per person, which is really impressive because I'm sure you all know there's a lot of Chinese people. So there's one CCTV camera for every 2 Chinese people, about 700 million CCTVs. If any of you have ever been to Beijing in China, in Tiananmen Square, you can literally walk in spaces where there are many more cameras than there are people. And this is augmented not just by physical surveillance, but also they have a lot of capabilities to augment, that facial recognition, to be able to go back and tie that to larger pieces of your identity. One of the most disconcerting things I've seen is like sometimes they have jaywalking detectors, and they'll actually beam back like Citizen X, you've been jaywalking, and you're just like, Well, it's a little freaky there. But this isn't just confined to physical and facial surveillance. This is data being collected across the board. So in China, there are laws where there's a lot of data collection, including in finances. We'll talk about the central bank digital currency that they're putting out there. But in general, genetic data, cloud data, behavioral data of how you use apps, all of that gets swept together, and it gets put together and kind of tabulated and curated together. And not only that, these tend to stay in Chinese servers, because the Chinese state has been really, really strict about keeping all this data together in the Chinese surveillance state. And there is the Great Firewall, which this is just a photo of the regular firewall, but of the Great Wall. But I wanted to make the metaphorical point, for those of you who don't know, people in China, they actually don't have access to Facebook or Twitter or other things without using a VPN. They are banned or restricted from accessing certain sites. And this is kind of part of that system of surveillance and control that the Chinese state uses on its own people. And this is what Bitcoin was confronting. So I wanted to start there a little bit just to set the context, those of you not as familiar with the Chinese surveillance state. So just to kind of recap, the Chinese surveillance state, I think, is unique for a number of different reasons. There's a facial recognition element we talked about. There's something called offline-online connection, and I'll kind of explain that a little bit. So the Chinese state, to me, one of the most interesting things and probably one of the most chaotic and concerning is they actually will take your online activity and correlate that to your offline activity. So we've started to see that, by the way, just because if you're in the West or whatever, you're not immune to that. The United Kingdom has arrested people for different statements of speech and things like that. So I don't want to let that be unsaid. But in China, you've had people who tweet to 23 followers, 30 followers, they get put in jail, right? Glory to Hong Kong or something like that. There are people who refuse to pay with credit card on Substack because in Hong Kong, it is illegal to support people who are in the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong, even abroad. So people who go overseas, they can be prosecuted if they ever come back to Hong Kong. So this is what I mean by offline and online connection. So one of the things I did way back in the day, I'm one of the most powerful humans on this earth. I have admin access to the Bitcoin Club, the Cybersecurity Club, as well as the largest English language Chinese club on Clubhouse. Now that that app's died, not so much. But we actually had these rooms where there would be people in China talking about their day-to-day lives, and then we would ask them, like, hey, have you drank tea with the police? Which is kind of the police takes you in and asks you questions about your online activity. And we had several people where that happened. So just to give you all an example of that. And of course, people talk to me all the time about the social credit score Great Firewall. And I dedicated a whole chapter of the book to the social credit score. I am by no means the absolute best source. I encourage you all to, there's Yale Law Translate and others. But the general point I would make is the Great Firewall and the restrictions on Bitcoin serve the same purpose. So in China, it basically allows the Chinese government to collect as much data on you as possible and consolidate that all together and then decide what to do with that, whether they want to penalize you or anything else. In China, there is this kind of court judgment list where, for example, you're restricted from traveling if you're on that list. And that list comprises approximately 1.8 million people, I believe, as of today. So your financial transactions, if you try to buy travel tickets, are restricted. So how does Bitcoin fit into all that? I'm sure you all have heard the meme. Bitcoin has been banned by China 20, 30, 40, 50 times. How many more times can China ban Bitcoin? I'm here to tell you there can be more. But, this is where you really see, what I tell Bitcoiners is that China is what we call the red team. And in cybersecurity, what that means is a very determined but engaged adversary who is actually messing with these systems. So obviously, as Bitcoiners, we're really proud of the fact this is decentralized, this is censorship-proof. But what does that mean when you have a government, the world's second largest economic power, really try and test those things? We're about to get right into that. So when we talk about banning Bitcoin, what do we really mean? And in this case, I think we're going to go point by point, but it's very instructive as to what it really means to be decentralized or to be trustless. So the first thing the Chinese government did is it basically told the banking system, you know, you can't use Bitcoin. And I always, sometimes I ask this question, you know, what was the first large company in the world to accept Bitcoin for their services? Does anyone in the audience know? What? Who? Bitmain? Tesla? No, it was Baidu. It was China's Google. 2013, they accepted Bitcoin for their cloud services. But they stopped doing that immediately after the Chinese banking authority stepped in and said, Bitcoin is not cool. But, you know, it didn't really affect Bitcoin because Bitcoin doesn't need banks. Then what they did is they took down what are known as KOLs, which are kind of influencers. But Bitcoin doesn't really need influencers to survive or to thrive. I mean, you know, that's also another part of it. Then it was the exchanges. So the whole idea was you could not trade yuan for Bitcoin on a public exchange. And if you were running an exchange in China, you were liable to be prosecuted. Like, they would go and arrest you. And a lot of the exchange owners, I mean, most famously CZ, Binance was founded in China, and CZ left. That was the beginning of him leaving, as well as all the other exchanges. But, you know, people, I've got like so many ways people have gotten around this. Like, people buy a passport from another country. They, you know, put a fake address. They, you know, they do trade peer-to-peer. There's like still WeChat groups and stuff where people kind of trade with each other. There's Telegram groups. There's just so many ways that you can trade Bitcoin without using an exchange. I think it's actually really inspiring to see. Then there was the mining ban, which we talked about, right? But not only does mining still happen in China, in fact, what happened was that a lot of the miners left, and they were more geographically spread, whether that was Kazakhstan, some of them ended up in the States as well. And that's a beautiful thing about how Bitcoin can be censorship proof at the mining level, right? Because you're talking about these miners, they're just like these big, they're not even that big, right? They're like these little chunks of software, these computer chips. You can just kind of pack up and leave and just go for it right now. But I'm here to tell you that there have been sources that have told me that China, like there's entire provinces where mining still persists in China. And part of the reason why is because, you know, the Chinese government, the local governments, they want the tax revenue too. And the Chinese government has already been, some former officials have been on record as saying it was a mistake for us to send all of this stranded energy tax revenue straight to the United States. Straight to the United States. So something to think about. There have been some arrests. People have been arrested for trading Tether and Bitcoin. Mind you, it does take a special type of person to get arrested for that. Like, for example, one person got arrested because they went and they said, I was making illegal. It's kind of like that person who's like calling the cops and being like, my weed farm totally got robbed. Like, can you guys please help me? So that kind of, some of those cases are like that. They're generally, they're not as like aggressive with individuals, but I did track that there was about 1,200 people that were arrested in 2022 for trading Tether and Bitcoin. Normally it's the people who are selling, and we'll talk about that, but you know, it's also some of the buyers as well. And you know, it's fortuitous that Will is here, because Will created this amazing app called Damus that we all talked about. And Damus was shut down, like, I think 2 days after it launched in China. So that was something that I actually covered in my book. But you can't shut down the entire internet. And there are still a lot of Chinese people using Nostr because they joined with Damus way back in the day. And there's some relays, because the relays, the way it works, you know, it looks just like internet traffic. And so you can't necessarily ban every relay. Now, the Chinese state, in line with what I said with it being a red team, was pretty smart about how they went after Damus. Like, not only did they take down Damus from the App Store, so China's one of the most aggressive countries at working with Apple at taking down apps. So that's one thing to know. But they also actually disabled the default relays in Nostr, in Damus, which I actually think is kind of cool, because it shows that there's some level of bureaucrat who's running after Will or anyone else and like trying to figure out the technology and like banning it proactively. So all this said, we talked about all these different reasons, and this is why Bitcoin is decentralized, can be censorship proof. These are all these tenets, all these different attacks can be defrayed by Bitcoin's properties. But we still have to concede that, you know, the Chinese state has been very sophisticated about the way it's attacked the network. So having said that, let's talk a little bit more positively. So as I mentioned, some posting activity continues on Nostr. I actually have some MPubs that are kind of like circulating around so that people can take a look if they want. I mean, that's some of the clients, the beautiful thing is you can get it translated. Although the translation's like hit or miss. So sometimes when I see the Mandarin post getting translated to English, it's like butt pickle English, and I'm like, I don't know, maybe we need to work on the AI for some of them. Not calling out any particular clients, but there is the possibility to read kind of what people around the world are posting about, which is kind of cool. One other thing I also really talk about is that from the quantitative measures that we have, mainland Chinese people are buying more and more Bitcoin. And there's this term of like the B-Chen or like the B2B-Chen, which is like the Bitcoin circle, right? And that's still happening. Like I talk with people who are, they're having these they're not super public about it, but they'll have these underground meetings and they'll talk about Bitcoin. They'll do like peer-to-peer trade. But not only that, there's a lot of people still buying Bitcoin from China. So China's a very important part of the Bitcoin economy. And for those of you who don't know, the Chinese economy is not doing super great. Youth unemployment is very high, close to 21%, which is close to what you saw in Europe during the 2010 kind of crisis. There is a whole generation of Chinese youth who are trying to figure out, where do I belong in this society, right? Money is everything. That's also another thing. China has changed into a society where money is everything. I know we have this confusing, is China communist, is China socialist, is China capitalist? But what I will tell you is that Gucci matters a lot more than Confucius. That is my short primer for China right now. And when you're thinking about all these economics, like one of my favorite questions to ask for people in mainland China is like, how are your domestic shares doing? How is your housing doing? Because the problem is you have all these people, great Chinese entrepreneurs and everyone who made a ton of money, but they can't move their money out of the country. They can only invest in the different options the Chinese government presents to it. So for example, they can only buy Chinese housing or they can only buy Chinese shares. They can't even really get easy access to US-based equity options or anything else. So Bitcoin is an escape hatch for a lot of people who are effectively seeing negative return. So I get answers going from, my housing has gone down 30 to 40%, like super nonchalant too, and I'm like, yeesh, like I've had like, some people's portfolios are down 60%. It's kind of crazy. We kind of talked about this a little bit. There was another presentation about it, but mining operations have expanded globally. A bunch of people went to Kazakhstan. A bunch of people went to, the States. Some of them are here, Texas, and everywhere else. And I can say that there's been 2 people that have told me that Xinjiang, which is also where the Uyghurs are, they never actually shut that down. So there has been mining ongoing for a pretty consistent basis. There also was, one of my funnest stories is like, there was a local Chinese official who was sentenced to life in prison because he was basically running a Bitcoin mining company. And I'm pretty sure there are like a lot of people doing this. Because again, the local government, this is kind of the really interesting thing with Bitcoin mining, is you can mine as a local government entity. And it makes so much sense. Like the numbers make so much sense. The Chinese government, the federal government, had to go all the way out and say Bitcoin mining is harmful for the whole of Chinese society. But even then, local officials are like, I gotta get bribed, I gotta get my cash out. And people have run like mining operations. Because the local government is the one that's responsible for the police and is responsible for the enforcement there. So, we had one senior party official who did get locked up. They made like 400 mil or something mining Bitcoin, just using the province's resources. And I think that there are former officials, Chinese officials, who are now conceding like, this is like a huge mistake. There was a professor, a Hong Kong professor, who wrote like, this is one of the biggest strategic errors China has made. Okay, like you don't like Bitcoin mining? I don't know why you don't like it, but sure. You took all that activity, brought it all the way to our biggest geopolitical rival, and that biggest geopolitical rival is now making all that tax revenue, generating all those jobs, and getting the expertise. What I've told people, like in Congress and stuff like that, is this is the first time China has been eating the United States' lunch when it comes to manufacturing, when it comes to expertise with hardware, building semiconductors, building different atoms and bits instead of just bits. This is one of the first times I've seen where China has actually given back to the United States, willingly kicking out the miners and telling them, go to the States, you're not wanted here, go to anywhere else in the world. Yes, Bob. The Chinese government is not as smart as some people might think it is. That's my opinion. But I mean, I think they were really focused. So for a very long time, China has, I think, been making a very grave mistake, which is to mistake blockchain with Bitcoin. So they have hired 500,000 blockchain professionals. I don't know what they're doing, but they have hired them. And they've seen Bitcoin as waste. Yeah, and we'll go into it, but there was specifically a Chinese official who said Bitcoin mining was harmful for the whole of Chinese society. They're looking at the environment, because to them, if you frame Bitcoin as waste, to them, Bitcoin is waste, right? It's against also the system they're trying to create with the capital controls and the central bank digital currency and the centralized control. So to them, they see Bitcoin as kind of the enemy, but with Hong Kong, you'll see there's a little bit of a subtle wrap. So hopefully that helped with the answer. Cool. And it's not just Bitcoin. We have freedom tech, right? Like people are using Nostr. It's not like a huge, crazy amount. I want to say there's like a million, people on Nostr, but there's been a flow of people, Chinese people that have used Nostr and gotten more and more involved. And they actually use Nostr to teach each other how to get past the Great Firewall and to like, how to get VPN free access and like how to get Telegram and all these different things. So it's a very, very cool ecosystem. And there's a lot of Chinese entrepreneurs. Some of you might have noticed this too. Like, there's a lot of Chinese entrepreneurs and VC funds that are still around. And I talked to some Chinese VCs that are based out of there. There's some projects that are composed of Chinese entrepreneurs that are kind of building on Bitcoin. They like to do kind of more of the L2 stuff, but there is a lot of mining companies and everything related to that. So that's ongoing. And next time you go to Bitcoin Vegas or any of the booths, just look around, learn a little bit of Mandarin, say hi, ni hao. Yeah, and this is the part that I find really cool is like there are among us Chinese people who use Nostr. Sherry's really cool. Will and I were just talking about this. Sherry actually reached out to me after I published the book because I put her in the book, and she was like, wow, which made our Asian parents super proud of each other. So warm vibes. But no, there are people. What I've seen that's really interesting about Nostr usage in China is like people actually discuss their day-to-day. Like I actually translated a bunch of Mandarin posts. Notes into English, and like people were talking about the subway station in Suzhou. They were talking about the pricing of housing and real estate and gold. They were talking about how gig workers. This is a pretty constant topic in China. How gig workers don't make enough. So all really, really fascinating stuff. We got Michael Wong. Mao Yi is kind of cool. That's the person that's sharing like a lot of like privacy tech. Michael Wong is kind of like the Mandopop Prince of Love. So it's almost like if Taylor, and he's like really active on Nostr actually. He posts all the time after his concerts and stuff. He's always asking for sats. Like imagine if Taylor Swift was like on Nostr and it was just like after every concert she was just like, don't forget to zap me. It's kind of what's happening with there. So there's a lot of really interesting activity that's happening there, and you risk kind of missing that if you don't see that. And so what is kind of the current state? Like we talked a little bit about the bans, the resilience. Tether is kind of used as like the main on-ramp. So if any of you were all wondering who's using Tether, it's China. But I mean, I say that, I mean, there's also other countries too, like Iran and like whatever, but in general. And yeah, there's a lot of Chinese exporters. A lot of people kind of like use Tether to get into the broader crypto ecosystem. I'm not gonna lie, there's a lot of like gambling and degeneracy as well. They're really active, and there's like different ways of doing it, but one of the main ways is they have the old exchanges like Binance and stuff like that. They have a section, good old Binance, trying to evade restrictions since forever, right? And so they kind of like wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and help Chinese people navigate how to buy Bitcoin. It's not really that difficult, actually. And so the people that take the risk are really the sellers of Bitcoin. So what I've noticed is like a lot of them tend to put these local bank accounts that are like they don't bank with like the main bank. So those people are taking a risk. Like they will get the slammer if they get caught. But there's a lot of people who buy it. Most people buy Tether, 2 reasons. One, the spread is lower, and they're trying to use it to trade. And the second is there is this psychological thing. The US dollar reigns supreme among all these different countries. I've always said that stable coins are the final boss, and I think that's China's perspective is kind of why I say that. China's still a very large part of the Bitcoin economy. Y'all are wondering, some of the OGs are selling. Who are these mysterious OGs that are selling? There's also people who are buying from that side, right? Like we talked about, it's kind of a gray market area. So it's a very large part of how the price is being built now too. And there's all these different social media groups where people talk. Like I'm in a bunch of these Telegram groups, and people talk to me about their businesses and stuff like that. And so it's really cool to see. And actually, there's X spaces where they like talk to each other in Mandarin, and it's kind of more the gambling side, but you can learn a little bit of Mandarin maybe and then listen in. But there's a lot of activity on social media. So all this to make the point that we went through all these bans, we went through all these actions, but there's still continued resilience even to this day. And just to put that in numbers, because I've just been ranting to you with words, this is from Chain Analysis, probably my least favorite source, but they do have really good sourcing. So they have relationships with the Chinese-based over-the-counter exchanges. And the 2021 is when the bans happened. That's when the mining ban happened and the exchanges ban happened. They had an ICO ban a little bit before that I didn't really cover, but that was more 2019. But as you can see, number go up, and quite significantly. And this, I've been told by Chain Analysis, is a lower floor of how much Bitcoin is being bought by Chinese people. So just to take a look at like some of the inflows, like it's pretty significant. Of course, Hong Kong also has an ETF as well. That hasn't been doing as well. But you're seeing quarterly inflows of billions and billions and billions of dollars coming in from these Chinese kind of exchanges. And this in no way captures all of it. Like I've had conversations with exchange owners, and they've been like, yeah, we have this like mystery category. Like 40% of our traffic is from some mysterious entity. We call them Ireland or like the leprechauns or whatever. No, it's China. It's people from China who are going to the exchanges and buying. So I did, how am I doing on time? Okay, cool. For those of you, I'm assuming most of you know the gentleman on the right. Is there anyone who does not know? It's fine if it's fine. It's not a trick question. We're not in like high school or something, but it's Pooh Bear. Man, my chances of going back to the mainland, they decrease with every talk. But I always say the individual on the left is actually Bitcoin's hidden, so far, the like intermediate boss. I don't know who Bitcoin's final boss is going to be in the video game scheme, but the individual on the left is Liu He, and he is the most senior Chinese government official to ever comment on Bitcoin. So Xi Jinping has never actually publicly commented on Bitcoin. So Liu He was one of the, he was like the vice premier. He was responsible for kind of this like economic stabilization committee. And so he was the one who actually got the Bitcoin mining ban and some of the exchanges ban, law enforcement involved, really kicked off. He's the one who was famously quoted as saying, Bitcoin mining is harmful for the whole of Chinese society. So to that earlier question, so one thing to know about Liu He is he is very much an industrial, he is Xi Jinping's right-hand economic man. When Trump was negotiating the US-China phase 1 or whatever in 2016, Liu He was his direct counterpart. Liu He is the one who gives the talks when the World Economic Forum comes to China, our favorite people, the World Economic Forum. He is the one who gives the talk representing what the Chinese economy means. He's now retired, but he was Xi Jinping's right-hand economic person. And if you wanted to dive into a little bit deeper, I actually am a really big fan of Reading Your Enemies. He has 3 or 4 books on industrial development. And the Chinese model for development is very, very different from Bitcoin's model. Open source, decentralized, bottoms up, devs getting together. It's very much a top-down, government-sponsored, government-endorsed, kind of like concerted action, strategic leverage. So you can kind of see that with AI and semiconductors and things like that, the Chinese government trying to invest into those motions as well. And then you might be wondering, because you don't read Mandarin, what the hell is on the second slide? And the second, yes, Mao Zedong is on there. By the way, I've been surprisingly shocked by how few Americans now, there's been many Americans that don't know Mao to me, so that's been a new thing for me. But hopefully everyone in this room knows who Mao is. Quick primer, Mao, 1949, communist leader. He's the reason why China's communist. He's on all of China's money, as well as the portrait of Tiananmen Square. But that is, speaking of, the CBDC, the digital yuan, so China's digital yuan. So what it actually really means in Mandarin is 数字人民币, which means digital yuan, right? And so just giving you all a little bit of a look at what the CBDC looks like in practice. You know, and Liu He, and the reason why they banned Bitcoin was because their path is to have a CBDC, you know, if it's not WeChat Pay or Alipay. So China went from one of the most cash-using societies in the world to the most cashless in one generation, in a single generation. Now, when you go on the streets, even the homeless people, they don't beg you for cash. They're literally like, scrape my WeChat, like pay QR code. It's crazy how mobile payments, it's increasingly unlikely that you'll be actually able to pay with cash in China. And so the Chinese path has certainly been to make sure that that data and those usage patterns and the ability to be able to expire funds, to force people to spend on certain things, remains in the Chinese government's hands. And so Liu He has been kind of like the motion, the bridge behind that. A lot of the regulatory agencies that are behind the Bitcoin restrictions are really the central bank trying to institute this plan of surveillance and control through the digital yuan, right? This is something also that I also tell people is a model that they're trying to create for the rest of the world. And in fact, China has integrated the digital yuan with other countries, including the United Arab Emirates, bought oil from the United Arab Emirates with digital yuan and a direct attack on the petrodollar. And it is finding ways to try to spread this model to countries that are even ideologically opposed to it, such as India, where you now see digital rupee and mobile payments similar to China. So this is really a race. I know we're talking about the scaling to 10 billion. That was a talk today. And what I'm positing to you all is that there is a race, there is a true race, and this is one of the most determined adversaries, and one that is ahead in some ways, definitely behind in terms of user adoption in some respects, but ahead in terms of engaging with other countries. So you might also, and again, my chances of going to the mainland decrease with each time I give this talk, but you might be wondering a little bit, because you might have heard, well, weren't there like the Hong Kong protests, and isn't there like a Bitcoin ETF and an Ether ETF that's been launched in Hong Kong? And you know, it does seem like the Hong Kong government, so one thing to know is that Hong Kong and China are two separate systems. They're converging, but the whole idea is this thing called one country, two systems, which means Hong Kong can be governed in a semi-democratic fashion. You know, there are like some financial restrictions. They have what's called a basic law that was messed around during the protests, but essentially there is something in there that says that Bitcoin, there will never be the level of Bitcoin ban in mainland China as there is in Hong Kong, simply because they would have to change the entire constitution, which they would not be against, but it is like a bigger step than what most people realize. For now, it does seem like the Hong Kong government has embraced being a Web 3.0 hub. And it seems to be like more of a broader crypto motion. There are Hong Kong legislature members and a more open kind of discussion forum. So I've actually been quoted a few times, and there have been other people who have basically been against China's Bitcoin bans, and that gets published in Hong Kong's newspapers still, in the South China Morning Post. Less so on China Daily and other places. China Daily, other places, digital yuan good, Bitcoin not mentioned. You know, South China Morning Post, fun story, owned by Jack Ma, who you all might have remembered, disappeared for a brief period of time when he criticized the Chinese financial system. He's still at it, just more subtly. So there's a lot of topics here, and I'm going to leave some of this to the Q&A, but just to think about some of the stuff that we talked about and go through it. You know, some people ask me, like, why doesn't China just mine Bitcoin? Like, why does the country just mine Bitcoin? So China is the country in the world that produces the most electricity, twice as much as the United States. So you would think it would be a natural fit. But as we've kind of alluded to, the Chinese government, at least at the national level, is very against it for its own ideological reasons, for the reasons of control and surveillance. Now, China has also seized Bitcoin, similar to the United States with Silk Road and Bitfinex. China had at one point the largest, or one of the largest collections, 210,000 Bitcoin seized from Multicoin, as well as other kind of court issues. So that's been slowly sold over the course of years, but that also means that the government is still holding on to, we think, probably 15,000 Bitcoin, a reasonably significant amount. And the fun thing, too, is that the British Bitcoin stockpile, which might be the world's largest now that we think the Marshalls only have 28,000 Bitcoin, is actually from China. It was laundered into Bitcoin from investment fraud purposes, and now the British Metropolitan Police is sitting on 61,000 Bitcoin from a Chinese takeaway worker called Jian Wen. Funny story about her, she went and tried to buy $10 million. If you all are gonna money launder, don't money launder like this individual. She went to these $10 million housing properties and just straight out tried to buy them with cash. And they were like, well, where are you getting this money from? And she was like, my boss gave me this gift of $10 million. So just be better if you're trying to money launder. And as we talked about, you know, people in the mainland are still buying. They are also still selling. So but very much the point is that they're part of the global price discussion. I put technocrats versus officials because that was something I observed is like, in India and Nigeria and these other countries, it's actually the central banks against elected officials. That's actually where it's mattered. I actually don't think that the Chinese government, although now this, okay, well, whatever, I'm just gonna go with this. I don't know if we can fix this, but the Chinese government doesn't actually necessarily care as much about, you know, like the political officials, but the central bank officials do a lot. So if you start analyzing that along that line, it makes more sense why a country like India or Nigeria, they're also trying to go down the CBDC path, even though they are not necessarily aligned to China's ideology. And in fact, in many ways, they're oppositional to China. But to me, China is like, what if you let the technocrats make all the decisions? If there was a 30-year plan and the central bank was like, this is the best way for us to have digital money. It's just all central banking money. And then you had the elected officials who were kind of in and out about that, but like they didn't have a strong opinion on that at best. Then you would get something similar like China. The reason why I bring that up is because that is a much more generalizable formula to like half the world than what most people realize. Because Modi, to use the India example again, has deferred to the central bank. And that is why you are seeing a digital rupee being embraced aggressively as well. It's just something to think about. And then, of course, there's CBDCs versus stablecoins versus Bitcoin. You know, I think China's the spear point of this because the digital yuan is the world's most advanced CBDC. And of course, Chinese people use Tether, as we discussed, to get around restrictions. And I truly believe that as Bitcoiners, if we can convince people who are currently on stablecoins to get onto Bitcoin, that is an easy next billion to scale. Cool, so what's the future gonna be like as we're kind of wrapping up into the Q&A section? You know, I get asked this a lot. The first thing is like, I'd be very surprised if there was an unban. I'd also be very surprised if there were further bans. But by the way, there could be, because in Bitcoin, in China, it's still legal to have Bitcoin as property. So they're not going after Bitcoin holders as of yet. And actually, if it comes up in the court and you're using Bitcoin as property, that is protected by Chinese law. It's recognized as property. So, you know, when people ask me, can China ban Bitcoin more? My answer is yes. I'd be very surprised if they did either or. Hong Kong seems to be being positioned as a digital assets hub. Opinions differ about whether or not that's deliberate or not. I mean, part of the context I tried to give you all is that like part of Hong Kong's governance structure makes it very difficult to ban trade of Bitcoin regardless. So Hong Kong, what they're trying to do is trying to regulate it. But even today, if you go to Hong Kong, you can go trade cash for Lightning Sats, like in massive quantities. You can even trade physical renminbi, like yuan cash, at these like over-the-counter exchanges. And you know, you can go to a shopping mall, you bring you know, your Lightning wallet or whatever, you send them to me, you get Hong Kong dollars right away. So that's still the case. They're trying to crack down on that and make that more centralized, but it's unlikely that there will be an outright ban on Bitcoin like we saw in the mainland. And Hong Kong, it seems to be advertising in order to get, you know, direct investment flows. We saw the launch of the ETFs and the spot ETFs. Those are forbidden from mainland Chinese, but again, this is a movement where Hong Kong is trying to. It's just so interesting where Bitcoin has grown, where now all these governments are using Bitcoin as branding. It's like crazy to think about. Like 10 years ago, we're all in our basement doing bit devs or whatever, and now it's like governments are like fighting with each other. Even governments that are somewhat hostile to the idea are fighting with each other to embrace that we're Bitcoin friendly. So just a crazy thought pattern there. Oh, I only have 1 minute. China's economy is doing really bad. China is going to watch whatever Trump does. Whenever Trump talks about crypto, they always, he always talks about crypto. They always have a little statement out from retired officials. War versus peace was kind of a point about Taiwan, because people sometimes ask me about that. Vastly underqualified, but I have some thoughts on that if anybody wants to ask. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Roger. We do have a couple minutes for Q&A if people have questions here.
Roger, I wanted to ask a little bit about Hong Kong. So does it still have a reasonable cash economy? And is that subject to the same surveillance levels as mainland China? And then, if you don't mind, my second question is, like, how are people managing to get around all of, go onto Telegram and talk about Bitcoin or X Spaces when the surveillance is so strong? Like, how do they, I don't know, surely they just basically get caught. So.
Yeah, no, those are two really good questions. So Hong Kong specifically, so they've been trying to push like different solutions in Hong Kong, including the ECNY, the digital yuan, but there is still like a stronger foundation for cash, I would say, in Hong Kong. That's like more anecdotal based off of like my visits. Yeah, I haven't actually really looked into how strong the cash economy is in Hong Kong, but certainly, these counters that we're talking about, like they exist en masse, like even today. So there's shopping malls, and Joe Nakamoto actually just had a video. I was actually working with him, well, not working with him, but like I was consulted on it a little bit, and he actually went to Hong Kong. He's running around in all these different places and just giving physical cash and getting like sats back. So there's still very much is that. I would say in some cities in the mainland now, it's like very, very difficult to pay for things in cash entirely. I would say in Hong Kong, it's definitely like a little bit less integrated with the mainland kind of ecosystem. Did that answer your first question? Okay. And then your second question is really, really interesting. I do spend a lot of time like dealing with this, even myself. Like when I was in China, I used to like go back and forth, less so often these days, but I would work from there. And the honest question is like, it's interesting. You build all these gates, and what you've incented is just stronger legs, if that makes sense. I don't know if that metaphor is the best, but I'll just stick with it. The point being that, like, if you outright ban content, like, for people, like, I think people, like, who are kind of in between, that's why I think Damus was also kind of successful for people, and Nostr just in general, because in China, it's kind of like you have to get around all these things. There's very strong incentives, because you want access to like any number of things that you just flat out don't have access to if you don't have a VPN. So so many people use VPNs, and it's called flipping the Great Firewall. And there's so many strong incentives for you to do that. It's like basically like the wider internet. Now, one area of the Chinese surveillance state that is very tightly monitored is your SIM card. I heard from a little birdie, those of you traveling to China, that Silent Link works really well in China and other places. And I would consider it because one way the Chinese state really controls like kind of apps. So the Chinese state kind of has control of the App Store, right? They can tell Apple, and Apple will obey and take down, whatever app they ask for. And in fact, China requested, I think, almost every year, they have it in their safety and transparency reports, like 1,000 apps. And of the 1,000, it's like China requested 970 or whatever, and then those were taken down for whatever reasons, right? But, there's the APK, right? There's the APK, the Android root stuff, so you can kind of download it through there. Then there's the other layer of like, how do you get past the text surveillance? So there is very strict text surveillance in China. Just a quick story, I had someone who was talking to me about how they were phoning overseas numbers, and someone from, not like the government, but like the telecom agency was like, you should stop calling overseas numbers. They do monitor that. So that is one way they know like Signal or Telegram users is through that text layer. So there's people who like teach you how to like get across that. But yeah, it's, you know, I feel like it's kind of a beautiful thing that because you've placed so many guardrails, people are just so used to like getting past them that it's just like now you just have all these like incentives. And you know, like VPN companies, it's a little bit like weed, I feel like. Someone was actually just telling me that in Guangzhou, there's like a bunch of different like ads for VPN companies. Similar to how you're like, are shrooms legal or illegal? But then you like walk through Vancouver or like Portland and you're like, yeah, but there's like a bunch of shroom stores and the cops aren't like shutting them down, right? So I feel like VPNs are kind of like that. Like they will go after you if you're running a VPN company at scale. But if you're an individual user, it's a little bit, you know, you kind of have to be, again, one of those special types of people to get arrested for that a little bit. No offense to the people who did get arrested. Yeah, anyone have any other questions? Are we good?
Time for one more question. If anyone has a question? All right, well.
Oh, you want me to comment on Taiwan? Oh my God. Oh my God. Okay, let's wrap that up, y'all. You all were like coming for a Bitcoin conference, but let's just ramshackle this guy about his thoughts on global war and peace. No, it's all good. So first I'll say don't listen to me. Listen to any number of sources. There's some really good stuff out there. I think in the US there's a Taiwan's Relations Institute or something like that. And they'll have like a lot of think pieces. I interviewed this guy, I forget the name of it, but there is, if you just kind of look around, a lot of the Taiwanese military officials and policy officials are very open about how they would pursue a war against China. So if you were interested in that, like we actually on Clubhouse, we interviewed we were way underqualified to do it, but we were like interviewing the former chief of staff of Taiwan's military. And we're like, and he's just like out there, he's being like, yeah, like, you know what, like the urban population is gonna have to flee to the hills. We're gonna have to have drones like everywhere. I mean, one big thing that will happen, so just for people who know, because you all are Americans, so the United States has the Taiwan Relations Act. That's what defines its relationship with Taiwan. And it maintains a position in what's called strategic ambiguity. And what that means is that China will not, the US will neither recognize Taiwan as an independent nation, nor will it back off from asserting its right to intervene militarily if the mainland tries to. So it's kind of like this position of like, we are here no matter what. Like we're not going to advocate for Taiwan to advocate independence. But if you threaten Taiwan, neither are we going to stand back. And in fact, we're going to sell arms to Taiwan, which has also been happening as well. So, you know, just doing some research about that. I do think in a likely scenario that if China were to invade Taiwan, again, don't listen to me, but it would likely be a naval blockade. Taiwan imports 98% of its energy off the island. And a naval blockade would effectively accomplish everything China would need to do. There's probably internal sabotage and other things. Well, I once had this like X debate with like some person who was maybe a Chinese military official or not, I don't know, or LARPing is one. And they were kind of like pointing out like how China could infiltrate Taiwan's military infrastructure. And I was just having a boring Sunday. So I was like, hey, well, you know, tell me more. Let me know more. So, you know, a lot of topics will vary, but the last thing I'll end with is like the whole like people like China invading Taiwan thing. I do think like Taiwan is a much more hot button issue for China than most people realize. And that includes the Chinese people. Like there is a nationalistic sentiment, especially among, I would say, younger people. I had a friend who's a professor in China, and when Pelosi came to Taiwan, they were like, the students were like, why aren't we shooting her plane down? Like, what's going on with that? So, and in some respects, the government is trying to like rein that in. They almost like, it's a little bit too much, you know? So just something to think about. So on that note.
Awesome, thank you very much, Roger.